Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Raising the Bar. And as you know, I've been focusing a lot on giving survivors a platform on this show. And today I'm very honoured to have Rachel Vaughan on the show, who actually, funnily enough, watched my interview with Annika Lucas. And I also noticed Rachel had done her own interview with Annika. So there's a sort of a connection between us all. And I'm very, very happy to have you on, Rachel. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
Annika's a lovely,
yeah,
lovely woman.
yeah, she's a lovely woman, isn't she? And it's funny that I kind of was drawn to your message as well, your story, because I felt that in the same way that I felt when I heard Annika talk. I felt the same thing with you, and I reached out to you, and then there was almost that already there was that connection there between the three of us in terms of speaking. But I would love to know your story for the audience. I know that it's you are satanic ritual abuse survivor, MK Ultra, which is like a mind control program, a victim of that. And also you're a whistleblower for like a family member of yours as well. And we're going to talk about what's known as the Beaumont scandal, right? I think is that the name for it. But yeah, we'd like to get into
Yeah.
that as well. And how actually through this, you've actually developed some psychic abilities. And you actually teach this as well, and you're helping other people. So you've become a real light worker and a real healer. So is it okay, Rachel, if I gave you the floor to sort of expand upon
Absolutely.
that a little bit, and then we'll,
Yeah.
we'll get into it. Yeah.
All right. Well, people probably can tell from my accent that I'm from Australia.
Yeah.
I grew up in a little city, one of the smaller cities in Australia called Adelaide in South Australia, which is right down the bottom. So the land down under, it's interesting. That's one of the terms that people use when they describe Australia, and there's a reason why they use that sort of terminology. So the land down under meaning that it's sort of it goes under the radar, so they can do a lot of stuff in Australia that they probably can't get away with in countries that have a larger population. There's about 27 million in Australia. Just for context, after the Second World War, under Operation Matchbox, which was similar to Operation Paperclip, an MK Ultra sub-project, they sent out quite a few of the Nazis to Australia. They sent them to America. They sent them all around the place. And so we had some pretty dodgy people coming here to do some MK Ultra experiments. So people who may not know what MK Ultra is, it's a group of sub-projects of human experimentation. They probably started well before the Second World War, but they really ramped it up during the Second World War with impunity, and then they just kept going. And when I say with impunity, because they basically didn't get killed off, they just got ferried out to other countries afterwards.
Mm.
As a result of that Second World War, or just prior to it, there was a 1938 mandate in my country, but particularly in my state, for a bunch of tunnels, bunkers, and underground spaces, trenches to be dug because there was a concern that the Japanese were going to take over Australia. As a result of that, there was a whole, again, land down under, a whole undercutting of my city that I grew up in. And I was trafficked through the tunnels that resulted, plus the telecommunications tunnels and the water tunnels around the area of the suburb of Edwardstown where I grew up. My father was what you would describe as an ASIO operative, so the equivalent to Mossad, a secret service person, MI5, MI6, CIA type. He had, again, impunity from prosecution. He could do whatever he liked. He described himself as a special friend to police. And he did, in fact, have a very close friend who was someone that created child porn with him, child rape material, sorry, I probably should say, a chief inspector of police who is a convicted pedophile now. And yet, because of my father's actions and because it's been deemed an operational matter by
Mm.
police and authorities here, I can't even have that chief inspector investigated for what he did to me and another missing child or two other missing children because my father was allowed to do what he was doing. He was a blackmailer. So I was the honeypot for the blackmail. It gets worse. So, it's one thing to be used in honeypot operations from a very small child, but there was also MK Ultra experimentation. I was used in the theta psychic programming under MK Ultra.
Mhm.
There was also medical experimentation, as in I was used for prion experiments, which is now being rolled out as some of these things that go in there. Don't want to say too much.
Yeah.
This is going on YouTube, isn't it? So you got to be careful.
Mm.
And also, my father was instrumental in quite a few children going missing. not just the high-profile children. So the Beaumont case is a very famous case of three children from the same family. The only three children that family had all disappeared from Glenelg Beach in 1966 on Australia Day. My father was involved. He has named his close friend, Anthony Munro, as bringing the three dead Beaumont children to my childhood home. I was born later, in the boot of a car. They're all deceased. So my father's admitted to that. He admitted that in 2015 on camera. That went into an article and wasn't actually aired until after his death in 2017. Within a few days of his death, they finally aired the footage. Despite that confession, his two properties, where many children's remains are buried, have not been exhumed. They haven't been investigated. It's all just been pretty much put under the carpet. There are other missing children, high-profile missing children that he was involved with, that I was involved with as well. One of those children was murdered as part of the family murders, which is a series of murders that occurred in the 1970s and 1980s and involved young boys and young men who were horrifically abused, sexually, medically experimented on, tortured and murdered, and then their bodies were left out to be found. And I believe that was partly either because my father was leaving them out to be found, because he was sick of being used as a tool. He was a very confused man. He had many alters, different personality states, but it also was I believe, a terrorization campaign, just like the taking of the Beaumont children was part of a terrorization campaign.
For
So,
who?
and
Sorry.
apart from those children, the high level missing children, there were also thousands of children that went missing from my state, thousands. And
Wow.
a good 2,000 of those came from your country.
Oh, they came over from England. Oh
Yeah.
my goodness. When you say a terrorization campaign, what did you mean by that? Sorry.
So these young men and boys that were left out to be found, obviously having been tortured, sexually abused, and experimented
Yeah.
upon, they were just left out. Their bodies were left out, so that they would be found by people who just happened upon them. I know one family that's told me how they came upon
Yeah.
the body of the child that I unfortunately had some interactions with because we were friends with his family, a boy called Richard Kelvin. He was found next to a dam in Kersbrook, and they rang the police to tell them that they'd found his body, and the police wouldn't do anything. They ignored them for quite some time before they finally came out and picked up his body. And that's just how it's just how it is in my state. If you ring through, and the only way you can actually ring and speak to somebody about a cold case crime or a serious crime now is to go through a body called Crime Stoppers, which is privately owned. That's the only way you can access police in my state if you want to phone in and make a statement. And it's just very much shut down and sealed off, and
Yeah, of
you
course.
just
Yeah.
can't get anywhere.
Yeah, they've just got the whole system on lockdown, haven't they? Like from top to bottom. They've got it all firewalled off. You mentioned there that you said you were involved in it. How were you being used in that regard?
So, as far as the honeypot work is concerned, I'd be trafficked. So we had a hidden cellar beneath the house that my father built. So he built the cellar and built the house upon it. Next to the cellar was an old brick kiln that was used by a toll factory, and because there was clay in the area and they dug the clay out and built the kilns at a lower level, when they brought fill in and covered up all the kilns, well, there's all these kilns in the area, and this is an extensive factory. When this 1938 mandate came in for a tunnel trench or bunker at the back door within 20 feet of every house, every meeting place and every business, and because it was an industrial area, they turned all those bunkers into bomb shelters, put in all these tunnels. So I was trafficked around to other people's bunkers and cellars. I would be naked and I'd be forced to do something sexual to someone who would be prone in front of me. A lot of the time, in those cases, it was obvious that these people were drunk or drugged and they weren't willing participants. And flashbulbs would go off and footage would be taken. So my father had bitumized some old milk canisters, and these are the big old sort of metal milk canisters used to get in I guess the 40s and 50s, before my time. And he kept his blackmail material in those canisters. So when my brother had Anthony Munro, the man that my father alleged brought the dead Beaumont children to Edwardstown home in 1966 on the day they went missing, when my brother finally had Anthony Munro incarcerated the day before he was to be sentenced, because Munro abused
Mm.
my brother as well, during the time frame that the Beaumont children went missing. And just to clarify, there was a salvage, an exhibition diary written by my brother and another young man that put all of these very important people of, people of interest on the beach at Glenelg where the children went missing in the days and weeks before they disappeared. And my father also worked at the Telecom Exchange in Glenelg. I mean, there's also that he he wrote a letter to my mother trying to get an alibi from her to say that she was with him that day, and she knows categorically she was not. So he pretty much threatened to tell the world about some of the things that she was doing, which was just nothing in comparison to what he was doing. So, I mean, we've got this threats for an alibi. We've got her statement that she wasn't with him that day. We've got this exhibition diary. All these things add up. And he said that Munro brought the children to our house. My sister saw the dead children in the boot of a car. And my brother Andrew was there on the day. But anyway, the day before Andrew had Anthony Munro sentenced, and taking into account Munro did not contest any of the allegations that my brother made, Andrew McIntyre, my brother, made against him, 15 pages of statements. He didn't contest a single statement because he didn't want to be questioned in court about the Beaumont children. And this is extremely unusual, especially in my state. So the day before he was to be sentenced, the Major Crime Department finally interviewed my brother Andrew, and all they wanted to know about was those canisters with the blackmail material in them. They didn't want to ask him any of the questions about the Beaumont children. It was purely, and I've got the, Andrew managed to get hold of the footage of that interview. That was all they were interested in.
To cover
So
their tracks.
it just blows your mind, really. It's just so damned obvious.
What is that blackmail material then? What is that? Videos or what?
It would be me
Yeah.
and several other children, probably countless missing children, being filmed with important people that he wanted to have control over, probably quite a few of the people that he had around him that were part of this operation. He was a Freemason, so they were all blackmailing each other as well, because they have an oath to one another and they all blackmail each other to keep control of each other. So a lot of very condemning stuff. And a lot of those people probably are still alive, although many have died.
Wow. Wow. So what? So they pass children around and then film these sort of wealthy people, powerful people having, well, not really powerful, but you know what I mean, in this context, having, raping these children so that they can therefore use that video as blackmail for them to make them do things that they want them to do. That's the thing. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting that the blackmail material that I was part of, most of it, I believe, was people being unwilling to be involved. I was also used in child pornography, and I was also raped repeatedly by his friends. But when his friends were raping me, it wasn't filmed. Apart from, occasionally this chief inspector of police, he was filmed with myself and a missing child intentionally, and he knew what was going on. So some of them were willing participants in the filming. I guess, I mean, these people are really sick, so you don't really understand what their motives are, but he was a willing participant in that.
What's their so what's their kind of end goal with that? What are they trying to, how are they trying to use that to control people? What is in terms of getting their own people into power, or what kind
Well,
of?
this is how the world is run, unfortunately. So you've got a whole series of psychopaths at very high levels who control one another through these means. So Epstein Island's a brilliant example. And obviously everybody went out to that island, knew what they were going for. And again, when you have Freemasons have an oath to one another and to a code of secrecy, and they have a whole series of ways that they're going to kill you if you break any of those secrets in any of those levels that you go into. So, going out to Epstein Island was like I suppose for them, pretty sick bunch of people, that was like a badge of honor, I suppose, that they were sort of aligning themselves with these groups of people and allowing these things to be filmed. I think probably there'd be some clandestine work going on, but sounds like it was all pretty open. And I've described my father as Australia's Epstein for various reasons. I mean, he had impunity. Australia's obviously a very small country as far as population is concerned, but he certainly had a lot of power.
Can we say his name, or is that are we
Yeah,
allowed?
yeah, he's dead now, so you can speak
Mm.
ill of the dead. Yeah, Alan Maxwell McIntyre. He went by his middle name, and a lot of these pedophiles do that. They'll go by their middle name.
Oh,
So he
right.
went by the name Max.
Max. And you mentioned at the beginning that he was you mentioned he had an altar, which to me, does that mean that he was a satanic ritual abuse survivor himself from his own childhood then?
Well, his grandfather
Yeah.
was the Grand President of the Grand Lodge, so a very high-ranking
Mm.
Freemason, presumably a pedophile. Most of them are. And when you get to those really high echelons, you have to do some sort of pedophilia. So I assume my father would have been abused by him. My father's mother was very strange. She never cuddled me. She had an Order of Australia medal. These
Mm.
OBEs and OAMs
Right,
usually
yeah.
indicate dodgy things. Very strange woman. Not abusive to me, but weird, very weird. And that was her father, was the Grand President. And she was in politics, at a time when women
Mm.
weren't really in politics.
Mm.
Mm.
Goodness me. So, what about sorry, do you mind if I ask about your mum as well? Like, was she part of that as well, or did she not even know about this?
It's interesting. When I first started to speak out in 2018, I wasn't sure if she was complicit. I don't believe she was.
Yeah.
My father was a hypnotist, so he had the ability to rapidly induce her. He would click his fingers at her and say a few words,
Wow.
and she'd just be a zombie. He could do anything to us in front of her, could make us do things to her. She was completely out to it.
Right.
And
Yeah. Well, then that would make sense then that she was sort of there but not really there, in terms of
yeah,
no being aware of what's going on. And
yeah.
and unfortunately your dad was abusive to you, right? He was yeah. So it was like a business but also part of his own, I guess his own psychology as well, being that he's hurt, so he wants to hurt other people. That must have been a kind of a trait for him. Yeah.
Yes, and again, mentioning Annika Lucas, she's got
Yeah.
a whole, she totally understands the motivations behind psychopaths. She teaches a course on it called the
Mm.
unconditional model, and I've
Mm.
learnt so much from just the way that she's described it. These are people who are injured from childhood, who want to exact and project their pain onto others because they're unhealed,
Yeah.
and you get them in these satanic lines. And my line hails from the Kennedys. So you've got a satanic line. My grandparents were
Mm.
cousins, first cousins. So the incest was there, that the satanic line was there. They were inbreeding on purpose. So I believe a lot of people in my family have been abused, though only some of us have spoken out. And
And
it's just in these satanic bloodline families and these Freemason families, it's just that's what they do. They abuse their children, they traumatize them severely, and then they mentor them into positions of power. There's politicians in my family, media people, lots of academics. So I was given a Bachelor of Science degree, basically. I was allowed into it, even though I did not have the
Mm.
requisite marks and I didn't have the studies. But they wanted me to be a psychologist, and God knows what they would have made me do.
Mm.
And so when you're mentored and just allowed into something, I was told I didn't even have to put pen to paper in the exams. I would pass, and I
Mm.
saw I got out of there, so I could tell that wasn't something I wanted to do.
Yeah. And you've actually, like, you're an example, and so is Annika, that you've, despite being hurt, you've actually managed to, really work through that and heal yourself, and now being able to help other people and heal other people. So it's still possible to kind of come out of that kind of mental prison that you were put in, right? And that must have been, that's part of your journey, isn't it, to sort of go through that and remember certain things and have recollections of things and then work through those layers of pain and trauma that must have been really deep set within you. Is that something that, I mean, do you find that that's quite unique amongst your friends and people that you know who have gone through this? And how have you been able to do that for yourself? If you don't mind me asking, I know it must be
Yeah,
difficult to
yeah, no, this is a really
talk
good
about.
question, and I get that question a lot because you,
Mm.
you look at people who end up in mental institutions, or they're drug
Yeah.
addicts, or they're just really messed up, or they go on to be perpetrators themselves. So it's only a small percentage of people
Mm.
end up being perpetrators unless they're part of the bloodline families, and it's just that they can't escape and they can't get out of it. I was lucky; I got out at 16.
Mm.
Although that they were still dogging me after that, but I managed to keep away as much as I possibly could.
Mm.
It's a combination of being extremely stubborn
Mm.
and I just won't let them have it over on me. But it's interesting, my closest friends are other survivors who are speaking out like I am, because there's a camaraderie between us. When you've been through all
Mm.
of that, nobody else really understands.
Yeah.
And it's the only way to really find your peers, is to find people who've been through the same thing, doing the same work, trying to expose this stuff. So it's been so cathartic meeting other people that have been through the same stuff, some far worse than what I went through. And it's a meeting of minds. You can when you work together, you can work out, well, how do we fix it? How do we stop this? People from different countries as well. I'm friends with Danica, obviously,
Mm.
quite a few other survivors that are doing exactly what I'm doing. It's so I don't know why I'm different, except to say that I've always been incredibly stubborn, and I refuse to be a victim. I consider myself more of a warrior, or
Mm.
a fighter.
Yeah.
So sitting around feeling sorry for myself isn't going to get me anywhere.
I was also reading, I think, on your website that you had an affinity to nature and animals, and I think that that might be something that sort of keeps your consciousness up. Maybe
It
that's
does.
it because it kind of connects you to love and nature and everything else, and to little animals. They're very vulnerable, and if you care for them, there's a part of your heart that opens to that maybe also helped you through the process of staying, keeping your head above the quagmire, shall we say.
Yeah. Well, my partner actually said to me years ago that after about 10 years, or every 10 years, you replace every cell in your body. And that was just so incredibly freeing for me. So
Mm.
I've recreated myself multiple times since my abuse finished. So as far as I'm concerned, there's not any part of me that was defiled, or trespassed against. I'm new and fresh, and that's what being out in nature does for me too. And
Mm.
animals are amazing because they're so discerning. They
Mm.
only trust those that they know will not harm them. They can pick up on energy so beautifully. So, it's amazing to be trusted by something small and fragile that loves you
Mm.
for no other reason than it can feel your energy. So yeah, that's
Mm.
been incredibly cathartic as well.
Well, my cats, they tend to love me more when they're hungry, but
That's,
that's cats, though, I guess.
yeah. They're in a world of their own.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to ask then, because we talked about the altars, and you you had altars when you were a child, and I guess from the abuse, it creates those altars. And for anyone that doesn't know, I mean, I know a little bit from John Wedger, the detective. He talked to me about this. Don't know if you know him, but we actually I wrote a book based on our interviews together, and he was telling me about how when a child is traumatized and raped at a very early age, it splinters the mind, it fragments the minds, and creates these what's called altars. And then in those altars, you can plant in different tasks or symbols to you can actually almost create super, not I don't mean super, but like super strengths, super skills in these altars. Is this what happened to you, and what kind of super skills or altars were created with you, Rachel?
So basically, some of my earlier memories, or earliest memories, are being still in nappies, being held up by my dad in
Mm.
front of people in white coats, holding up Xena cards, or what I assume were Xena cards, which are these large white cards with black markings on them. And I was told, I was not verbal at the time. I was still very small, and I had a dummy in my mouth. But if I pointed, I could tell them what the person in the other room was thinking, what card they were looking at.
Oh.
And obviously when they're doing that training, there's a lot of praising going on. So they were praising me greatly, and if I got it wrong, I get a pinch. Later on, as I got older and it got a bit stronger in constitution, as they were doing that sort of testing, there'd be a cattle prod to the elbow. So there was a great incentive to get it right. And the problem with the reason they're using the cattle prod basically is not only to punish for getting something wrong, but it's to put you back into the alter state,
Mm.
or dissociate. So that instead of, all of the stuff around me, getting in the way of me picking up this information, I would go into another state and the information would come straight through. So, this is why they traumatize. This is why they do their projections and their predictive programming, because they want us to think a certain way and do certain things, and they want to just be able to click a finger or press a button and have us do what they want.
Wow.
And so children like myself were experimented on for that as well. It wasn't just to get information through us, but yeah.
Well, you just
to
said
learn.
something that just kind of really just opened something up for me there, was that it's almost as if society is in itself an empty altar that is being filled with predictive programming.
It really is. It
Wow.
really, yeah. So, I mean, they're experimenting on people for decades before I came along. I was born in
Mm,
1973, but they certainly had perfected it to a degree by the time I came along. And it's
mm,
really interesting. We sort of had a bit of a chat sort of off camera
mm.
and through emails about central heterochromia,
Yes.
which is something, this is my cousin Doug McIntyre's research, where there's a different color around the iris, around the pupil than the rest of the iris in the eye. And the Nazis were experimenting on gypsies who had this eye coloration because the Nazis were absolutely obsessed with the occult. Now, I have this eye coloration. My mother has it. Other family members have it. Quite a large number of my family actually have this. There's also the Rh negative blood in my family line. These are both signs of the satanic bloodlines. So if the people watching this have been used in MK Ultra, or if they've been part of satanic ritual abuse, and they have that unusual eye color, it's often called hazel eyes. It's not hazel eyes. Look up central heterochromia. There's another version too called full heterochromia, where each eye is a different color,
Mm,
and partial heterochromia or segmented, where you have just a slash in the iris or whatever. Um, and if there's Rh negative blood in the family, then you've also got, you're possibly part of, most likely part of a satanic line. Yeah. So, and the Nazis were experimenting on the gypsies for a reason, because they're obsessed with the occult, and people with central heterochromia are known to be through the Hindu religion. Many different religions believe that people with this special eye color have otherworldly abilities, that they're psychic, they can commune with God, they can see the future, the telekinetic, which is another thing. I mean, the
mm.
Nazis were absolutely obsessed with telekinesis, the moving of objects with the mind.
Yeah.
So they're just fascinated with what are the absolute boundaries of what a human can do. And people don't realize how powerful we are. We're incredibly powerful.
But is that for only the people that in some point in their timeline, in their lineage, that they were a satanic ritual abuse survivor? Is that why? Or could it just be anyone that have these skills and these gifts to do things?
I think when you've been so incredibly traumatized, the ability to split off into an alter, which can then be programmed, does give super skills to a
Yeah.
degree. So to answer your earlier question,
Mm.
um, I mean, I certainly had the photographic memory, and most of the survivors that I know who are, the high profile ones, all have photographic memory. So
Wow.
it's difficult to, and we'll be used for that for a reason. And you hear about these spies that go in and meet politicians and fall in love with them, supposedly, and get all this information from them. And they've probably been through the MK Ultra program themselves, the sex kitten beta programming, that sort of thing.
Well, yeah, Annika was telling me that she was used as a sex slave spy to obtain information and seduce
Yeah.
these men. And yeah. And then I guess you can also implant assassins and things like that. And they wouldn't even know that they are assassins because they're in that altar. And then they can be, when they're questioned, they're coming across innocent because they don't even know that they are the assassin because they're in that altered state. So
Yeah.
that's how they do it, right?
Yeah.
So fascinating. And it's making me think that, the Marvel comics are probably based on mind control. Um,
Well,
mm.
now my cousin Doug's research again, he's pointed out that many of these Marvel characters have heterochromia or central
Oh,
heterochromia.
right.
Yeah, yeah. So if you look into the number of Hollywood elites, people who are really high up in the
Mm.
acting and actressing, fraternity, they've almost all of them have got this eye color. It's uncanny. Amongst Caucasians,
Yeah.
it's 1 in 200 people. Very rare amongst boys, though. A third of that are boys. In the world's population, it's 1% of 1%,
Mm.
because most people are brown-eyed. So it's generally from the Celtic bloodlines
Right.
as well. So you usually have to have Scottish or Irish or, Celtic in the background.
So then you said when you said they were testing you for you were thinking about things sorry, you were mentioning what other people were thinking in another room. So then did they carry on using that? How did they apply that with you going forward?
So I've got a range of abilities. So I'm a medium. So I can
Right.
talk to spirits that have passed over. That was used. I can read auras. And so, it's interesting. I was talking to Ben Hawkes about this the other day and feeling rather guilty about it. And he kept pointing out I shouldn't feel guilty because I was a child. So I'm gonna keep that in mind.
Mm.
Um, I was used to spy on people, so I'm a remote viewer as well.
Right.
But I was also used to check out their aura because certain auric presentations can tell you whether or not that person's dark or light, whether they're evil or good people,
Mm.
depending on the color. Um, I was also used to commune with entities during rituals. So these people are so cowardly that
Mm.
they will use a small child to commune with an entity that they have summoned up and called in. They've generally what they would do is they would kill an animal or kill a child. With the satanic group that I was involved with, they it was used almost all children. My father did some of that stuff with animals, but it didn't tend to be in a ritual sort of situation. It was more just at home. Um, but yeah, that they would kill a child usually and now I'm learning a lot about ley lines and portals and things. I believe that they may have been utilizing the ley lines and portals. So
Right.
as a medium, I've come to recognize that, there are certain spaces on Earth, certain energetic lines, like ley lines, where it becomes like a corridor to many different dimensions. So this is why the Satanists do their rituals in ley lines and portals because it's already like a corridor with all these dimensions coming off. When they torture and murder a child in that space, it opens up a particular door to a dark dimension that they want to open. And then they can call in whatever it is that they want to summon up. And so I would be used to be the interpreter,
And why would they
which
want to summon? Why would they want to summon that demon up or that entity?
for power,
Right.
for control. So these people aren't very bright. So they align themselves. So just like you might have a patron saint that you might call on and pray to, or God that you call on and pray to, these morons call on these demonic entities because they can manipulate them under certain spells, whatever they're casting, necromancy, whatever you want to call it, to give them power. And you see so many, particularly in the music industry, you see so many of these people in the music industry talking about these demons that
Yeah.
that they're Eminem and Mariana did a thing about the monster in the under the bed or something. I can't remember what it was.
Mm.
That they summon up and they're probably examples, Rihanna and Eminem, of people who've been MK Ultra'd and had these attachments sort of forced upon them. But a lot of these elites, they do this for power. It's quite insane. Makes no sense, but it's what they do.
So they summon the demon or the entity, and then by just summoning them through like killing a child or something, that's what the entity wants, right? That's what the demonic force wants. That is that right?
Death opens a doorway. So
Right.
whenever someone dies, a portal opens for them to pass through. But when you torture and murder someone in a ley line space, because of the sounds of the
Yeah.
child's or the animal's screaming, it'll bring those demons to that doorway, ready to come through as soon as that child dies. And because they would summon up particular ones and call on it,
Yeah.
it would be ready and waiting and then come through at that specific moment. Now, some demonic entities don't necessarily want to exist in the hellish realms. The lesser ones don't want to exist in the hellish realms because they're predatory. When you're a good soul, when you go to heaven, you don't have to worry about some other entity coming along and eating you up. But the energy is different in those lower realms. So this is a lot of esoterics for people to
Mm.
sort of to cope with, but it's what they're trying to avoid. So, but it's interesting because a lot of the time when these things were done and I was used to commune with these entities, the entities were pretty pissed off about being called up.
Oh,
They
right.
didn't really want to have anything to do with these humans at all.
Right.
And
Okay.
they were annoyed that they were being manipulated.
And then how do these demons are it's like a Faustian bargain, right? But how were they able to help this human propel them up in the music industry, Hollywood or something? Like, what are they giving them in that moment?
They can give them abilities.
Abilities.
Yeah. So again, my father, and this is going to sound completely mental, but just his particular demon was Anubis, the Egyptian deity,
Right.
which is a jackal-headed demon. Okay, so just to clarify that, my father used that image for his Facebook icon. He used a dog skull with the cross, the skull and bones. As a look at me, that's who he had. So he had abilities. He could do things. He could control people. He didn't, it wasn't just the blackmail. He could manipulate people. Like I said, he could rapidly induce my mother. I believe he could do that to other people as
Mhm.
well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it gives them personal skills and abilities within themselves. It doesn't sort of open up the whole of society and grants them luck, in a sort of supernatural way. Um,
I guess you could talk about that being
yeah,
part of it. I mean, if you look at Aleister Crowley, who was the
yeah.
head of the Golden Dawn sect, and my father was also a member of the Golden Dawn
Mhm.
sect. He was also a Rosicrucian. Um, Crowley apparently had the ability to make people trip over. So
Mm.
there's a story about he was walking behind a gentleman one day with a friend and said, "Look what I can do," and used his telekinetic ability to make that person fall over. So I believe that was probably something that he was harnessed as
Mm.
some sort of ability. I mean, you can have those abilities and still be a light worker. Um,
Right.
to use them against people is completely wrong. That should never occur.
It's almost like I'm now understanding where all these stories come from in Disney and stuff. Like it's now all making sense with like the good witch and the bad witch and the wizard and the Harry Potter and everything else. This is all coming from real life skills that are coming from these different dimensions and transdimensional portals and giving you abilities and stuff like that. And then as you got older, you mentioned then that you were put into MK Ultra. How old were you then? It was obviously before 16, wasn't it? Because you got out then. But at what
Well,
stage
it
was that?
started with xenocards, like I said, when I was a toddler with a dummy in my mouth. The first satanic sort of ritual, it's interesting. It wasn't a ritual as such that I would describe it as, but somebody who's in the know said that actually would constitute that. So I had to, even as a small child, barely able to stand, I had to watch as two men did something terrible to two bodies. And my father, forced me to watch over that. Um, it started in infancy. He was doing experiments with me with sensory deprivation from a very small age. So from when I was tiny. The initiation, so this is again very brutal and probably something people don't want to know, but in my state, in South Australia, it's a commonality amongst survivors of the sort of abuse that I've had. The Freemasons will initiate a child's psychic ability through penetration through the back door,
Mm.
just to put it so it's not too brutal, before the age of 3 or by the age of 3. 3 is the cutoff. But in my particular circumstance, there was a knife involved, and that is not uncommon in my state. And I have medical documentation to prove that that occurred. So this is the interesting thing about my case, particularly. There's photographic evidence, there is medical evidence, there is a series of tunnels that I've proven over 2 years of research with some beautiful people across the world who helped me to research and find proof of those tunnels existing. I've put all of that out as evidence in on my BitChute and Rumble channels. As a result, instead of investigating,
Mm.
they've just started to destroy the tunnel system
Ugh.
and hide it.
So it's
So
still going on. It's all still going on then, really, is it? Is it still, are they
well,
still
that's
doing
why I had been speaking out. I had been making allegations. I had been doing all the right reports and things from 2006 onwards. But then I heard in 2017, just after my father died, that there was a child still being abused in exactly the same tunnel system that I was abused in. So I was abused in the 70s and 80s, and this poor child was still being abused. And I was furious. And so then I went public. I started doing interviews. I had just been, never put my picture out or anything. I just used my name. I'd been very straightforward about who I was, but hadn't put my picture out. Then I started doing interviews in 2018 because he was already dead. I couldn't get done for libel because the
Yeah.
libel laws in my state are also, I mean, they're so protected here. They are so protected here.
Mm.
Um, just to know that she was being abused infuriated me. But now, tunnel system's being destroyed. One abuser who's still alive, he's gone bankrupt, had to sell his house that he's had for 36 years. So that's something.
Yeah, that's
That's
something.
something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Not
this is
enough,
someone who
but it's something. Yeah.
he had a $500,000 fine for unclassifiable pornography.
Right. Okay.
And I believe that finally caught up with him because I keep talking about it.
So they do actually eventually, there is like a comeuppance eventually of these people. Is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, because it's almost that like they have to keep topping up with more rituals to kind of get that favor from the demonic world. But then if they stop, I'm guessing there's a, they want their pound of flesh, don't they? The demonic realm, is that right? Or they kind of cut all the support and the abilities they might have given, and then they're made to feel more mortal in that moment and a little bit
Yes.
more desperate.
Yeah, beautifully,
Yeah.
beautifully described. So
Mm.
what you've got is people sell their soul, literally sell their soul,
Right.
but you can only sell one soul, your
Yeah.
own. And so then they have to somehow appease these entities with other people's souls. I mean, my father tried to sell my soul. You can't sell somebody else's soul, but you can convince them that their soul has been sold, in
Ah.
which case that they would give it over willingly because the intent is it's gone.
Mm.
So if you can convince somebody under MK Ultra or any kind of mind control that you've sold their soul, the soul is sold. So
Mm.
as they get older and less able to access children or they're physically incapable of doing that sort of thing, yeah, they become haunted. And I mean haunted,
Yeah. Wow.
harassed. That's why I call these people incredibly stupid. I mean, why would you
Yeah.
align yourself with an entity that wants you dead anyway?
Yeah. When you say they take the soul, I mean, what does that actually kind of look like? What then happens if your soul goes? And what is that soul? Is that the real? If there's another way of describing that, is there?
So, I mean, some people don't believe in the existence of a soul,
Yeah,
but
of
if you
course.
look at photography, there's evidence of a soul. So, if you get a leaf and you cut one side of it off and then you take a photograph of that leaf with Kirlian photography, the whole leaf appears.
Oh
Some
wow.
of it's gone, but the light of the energy that existed before it was taken still exists. There's no way to explain that except to say
Mm.
that there's energy there that used to fill that space and still fills that space despite the fact that half the leaf is gone. So Kirlian photography can also pick up on aspects of the soul.
Mm.
So soul energy is the aura that doesn't fit in the body. So the aura is the soul that doesn't fit in the body.
Mm.
The soul animates the body through the chakras and meridians. And for people who don't believe in chakras and meridians, I mean, there's millennia of belief around these things. Just because the Western world's just like, oh, it doesn't exist because you can't touch it. I can't
Mm.
touch it, so it's not real. It's real. It's real. I mean, you look at Buddhist philosophies, Hindus. There's so many different belief structures around the fact that we have these things. So
Mm.
um, when I suppose, thank God, mine didn't get sold because I was smart enough to give my soul to Jesus when my father was trying to be through this ritual, because I knew enough to know that he was the good guy and I didn't want to be aligned with what my
Mm.
father was doing. I assume that those who sell their soul, then you see these people, these very hollow, lost, miserable people talking about how they sold their soul, and you can see there's no light. There's no light. It's like when you
Mm.
when you see an animal die, or if you've had a pet and you've seen it pass away, as soon as they go, the light comes out of the eyes. It's
Yeah.
a dullness straight away. And a lot of these people, you see them, they just don't seem to be all there. There's just no real light in the eyes
What
anymore.
you see that with politicians, you see it with Bill Gates, you see it with, a lot of these
Yes.
people, they're just empty vessels, aren't they? I'm not even
They
sure they're
are.
human, some of these people. They almost look like yeah, well, I don't want to go down that path, but you know what I mean? They're not sentient beings, is what I'm trying to say. For whatever reason, I don't know what it is, but you can just see they're dead behind the eyes. We have the health minister Hancock here, you know, Matt Hancock. You look in his eyes, he's just an empty, vacuous shell of a man.
I call them
So,
creatures.
yeah, yeah,
Just they're not human anymore.
no. Well, that's almost like doing it's almost insulting to actual creatures, animal creatures, calling them that.
Well, I don't call animals creatures because they're beautiful sentient beings,
Yeah,
and
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
to me, it's an insult on those supposed elites.
Yeah, the elites. It's almost like, yeah, it's a shame that we call them powerful elites because they're not. They're
Mm.
absolute cowards, aren't they?
Oh,
It's the most cowardly they could possibly be. And yeah, it's really unraveling how the whole network of society works. There's that when you scratch the surface, we don't even have to scratch the surface, but there's a framework, a network of occultic people and occultic behavior that's just right underneath the surface of society. And people like yourselves are coming forward to tell us that what's actually going on. And this is actually how the top, it's almost like they gravitate to the top positions of power everywhere. And I'm guessing through these rituals or through favors with the people in their group as well. That's another part of it, isn't it? They all kind of help each other out. Um, and then you mentioned there the Freemasons. Are they completely bad then, all these secret societies, or is it just like they may have started as a good operation, but then the bad goes to the top of those institutions as well, those
Well,
networks?
that's one area where they are clever. So I believe the very lower level people, they will put those lower level people in because they're like a cover, because they go out and do
Yeah.
good things in the community. And you hear
Yeah.
that Rotary is part of the Freemasonic sort of structure, and I'm sure that those people think that they're doing a good thing.
Yeah.
I'm sure the people at very low level in Freemasonry think that they're doing a good thing, although you've got to really question about,
Mm.
to the exclusion of all women. Women have to prepare the meals. It just,
Mm.
it's just biggest belief that people would still do that sort of thing, but I guess they
Yeah.
think it's all right. But yeah, but as you go up the levels, obviously you get darker and darker people.
But is the inception of it evil, or would you say it became evil by the people rising to the top and then using that for bad purposes, or is it very at the core like bad, these things, would you say?
Freemasonry, I think, kind of started out like, and the Illuminati supposedly
Mm.
started out like a union, like an
Right.
underground union kind of movement to
Mm.
protect workers, but it obviously got co-opted pretty early on,
Mm.
and it's turned into something completely dark. So I know that the Satanists love to invert. So they would generally take something that meant well and then destroy it
Mm.
and turn it upside down.
Or maybe religion is an example of that. The church, the Catholic Church,
Oh,
the,
it's
the Vatican, things like that.
absolutely.
Yeah, it's all inversion, isn't it? That satanic agenda is to invert everything that's, for me, this is what I think is everything that's intrinsic to nature and not proliferation, procreation is being inverted. So they're trying to block out the sunlight because obviously sun's good for us. They're trying to invert the sexes and and wage a war between the sexes, and they're trying to make all the things that are good nutritionally. They're saying that's bad, and then give us their fake meat and their all that stuff. It's just everything. Everything's an inversion of what it should be, isn't it?
And it's also mocking. They
Mm.
hate life.
Right.
So and they're mocking the victim all the time. So all these people running around with these things on their faces, and it's to mock. It's to mock them. Look at the good little slaves. Look what they're doing.
Yeah.
Look at what they're eating. Look how fat they are. It's all that stuff. They find that hilarious, absolutely
Mm.
hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't want to talk, I don't want to go too much into the mask and the COVID stuff because I've done so much on that in the last year. But obviously, we think the same on that one. But it felt as though it was one big giant. That was a ritual for me as
Oh,
well. I mean, you had at certain times, certain days, people coming out and they were like banging on pots and pans here. So they're ritualizing it. The mask wearing. That's almost cultish, isn't it? To try and submit someone,
yeah.
and then you had
Yes.
the worshipping of the people in the white coats, that lab coats. It's like that kind of religious element to it. You had all of that. It's to try and ritualize the aspect of it to make people really worship it and follow it. And it's if you stepped outside of that, you'd be called names like conspiracy theorist and a tinfoil hat wearer. So it kind of forces you back into that cult. There was so many
Yes.
parallels there. It was really shocking to
Yeah.
see. Friends and family as well really get sucked into it. Um, and then you become the heretic for like not wanting to be part of that.
And again, it was done so cleverly because it's about a communist approach, as in all for the greater good.
Build back
But
better.
if you've done your reading, oh yeah, if you've done your reading and you've looked into Orwellian dystopians,
Yeah,
you can't help but see it for exactly what it is. But I
absolutely.
don't think that people necessarily are stupid. I think they're just well-meaning and easily fall into that. So they've got humanity pretty well sussed because generally people want to do the right thing by each other.
That's how they did it. Yeah, don't kill Granny is the thing. And people that they were using people, they were weaponizing people's natural compassion and they were siphoning it off into their own totalitarian agendas. It's quite clever. They must have had real strong psychologists working on that behind the scenes. I think for Sage is one institution here, but they must have really spent a lot of time trying to work that out. Even the hypnotic elements. I know you mentioned your father learned how to do hypnosis, but I think a hypnotic trick is called double binds, where you have two opposite things and you give them the opposite words, and it confuses you. It puts you into a hypnagogic state. So up and down would be an example. You can't be up and down at the same time. So it confuses the mind. And then it therefore puts into that state where it's therefore more impressionable. And if you notice, they had social distancing. You can't be distanced and social at the same time.
Yes, of
Social is about
course.
closeness, and distancing is the
Yeah,
opposite. So when you have social, make sure you social distance. That immediately creates that double bind, puts you into that hypnagogic state. So therefore, more information, you can be more easily controlled and manipulated at that point. I was very aware of this as it was going along, and I was trying to wake people up and show people this. All my videos were getting taken down. I was trying to do as
yeah,
much as I could to try and show people this before the jab came in. And I was saying, there's going to be a jab, don't take it. And I was trying to do that early so that people were warned. But again, they had the man on TV comes in, the fear. When people are in a state of fear, they're more easily, they'll kind of go more into the herd, the hive mind, the collective.
yeah,
Because when you're in a state of fear, you want to quickly go into that group consciousness. So yeah, it was quite an eye opener to see what was going on and how it was actually a science experiment to see how humans behave. But it
yeah,
also really woke me up. It got my real tribe together. Maybe it was the same for you. You really found your people during that time, didn't you?
yeah, 100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, in a way that I never thought I could. But it's interesting, they also use this hypnotic vocalizations in the media, and they're still doing it. I can't watch television anymore because it just drives me insane. But they speak to you like this, and they make sure they put the inflections in a way that you just can't
Mm.
avoid it, and they all do it, and they do it really. It's actually quite comical in Australia, but it still makes me angry. The way that they use the inflection of the voice, and it's hypnosis. It is literally
Yes.
hypnotic.
It's also something I call this I coined this phrase screaming stewardess syndrome. It's where if you're on a plane, there's loads of turbulence. I always look at the stewardess because if the stewardess is calm, then I'm like, okay, they deal with this all the time. If the stewardess panics, then I'm like, okay, this is serious now. I'll start panicking. And I've
Yeah,
noticed that you could have a newsreader talk about an incident such as they could say 17 million people have died from the jab, which is actually people have been talking about this now. But it's all about the way that they say it. So if they're in a very calm and say, oh, by the way, 70 million people have died from the jab recently, and here's Tom with the weather. They will hear that, but they won't process that emotionally because it's like the stewardess being very calm and not panicking. In the same way, if
yeah,
the person on TV and in the suit and tie are saying this information in a calm way and not panicking, then they're only going to take what they perceive to be a non-threat. So they're going to say, okay, 70 million people, no problem. But if they start saying, loads of people are getting COVID and we're worried and grannies are dying, suddenly they'll take that on and they'll panic and they'll then panic them into action. So I call that screaming stewardess syndrome. That's like, and I've noticed that's how people are manipulated through the news. I've noticed as
yeah,
well. Um, Rachel, thank you for your time, by the way. Really, really appreciate it. There's so much I wanted to ask, and there's just, yeah, it's this huge subject, isn't it? And it's just
yeah,
endless, really, isn't it? Like how much you can go into.
yeah. Yeah, well,
But
thank you for doing what you've done to try and wake people up because it's extremely frustrating. I mean, I was doing exactly the same thing. I knew from April 2020 that something really wrong was going on. In fact, I had this overwhelming anxiety from about 2018 onwards. I knew something big was coming. I just wasn't sure what it was. I wake up every morning with this grinding anxiety. Oh my God, something really bad is about to happen. Yeah.
before we wrap up, Rachel, if it's okay, you mentioned your psychic abilities and then how it's led onto your courses and stuff like that. Would you mind just telling me and the audience a
Yeah.
little bit more about that and how it's led to you now helping other people with this and what kind of psychic abilities, what does that look like in terms of psychic abilities for you and for others that are doing the course?
Well, it's interesting. So, having been through the psychic theta programming as a child under the MK um, project, and also, having two family lines that have psychic ability in them, I decided as an adult, I'm not going to just throw that away because it was done to me in a dreadful way and I was opened up in a dreadful way. I'm going to use that for good. So every time I was used as a child, I was always aligned with angelic beings. I was always aligned with loving light entities. And they're the ones that actually kept me sane and kept me alive, plus the animals that I had in my life, even though they were being murdered left, right, and center in front of
Mhm.
me. Those that survived long enough gave me a lot of strength. Um, so I work now, I would describe myself as a soul coach. So because I can read auras and because I've noticed over the many years that I've been doing this work, both as a child, as an adult, there are certain characteristics for every soul frequency color that you can see. A lot of the non-graduate soul colors correlate to the chakras. So people who are driven by a particular chakra will have a certain vocations, like people who have a throat sort of chakra colored aura will be usually academics. They'll be speaking because it's the throat chakra. They'll do speaking jobs. So there's lots of little sort of nuances like that. So I use that to help people find out what their soul purpose is for being here. And there's never been a more important time on Earth to know why on earth did you choose to come and be here now with all this crazy stuff going on. And this is the first time, I believe, in human history, although we can't believe all that's what we've been told about history, where there's been so many souls incarnate on earth as humans at the same time. And I believe that's because we all needed to come together so that there'd be a certain number of us at this point who would get to a high enough frequency, which I might describe as an enlightenment. I would call that also as a Christ consciousness frequency, which I perceive as a gold in the aura, to turn this around, to take back what the Satanists have been trying to control. And I think that's what we're coming into. So if you look at the Kali Yuga prophecy, there's a Sathya Yuga, which is known as a golden age. So a lot of what I teach and what I help people with is to find out what their soul frequency is, how they can use that to better humanity. I also teach people how to recognize ley lines. So ley lines are, again, I described them earlier, but they're like the chakras, where the ley lines cross over are the chakra or portal points of the earth, and the leys are like the meridians of the human body. So the earth also has a soul. She's a living thing. Believe it or not, with the way that the frequency, sound frequency can produce light, and you can actually see ley lines if you know how to look for them. So people go out and they dowse for them, and they even talk about, the fact that where the layers cross over, they can create shapes, geometric shapes that they can dowse for, and they can find the geometric shapes. Well, if you look at places like the Vatican, that is one great big circle for a reason. There's a great big monolith in the center. That is a massive portal. It's a crossing of what I believe are 4 ley lines, 4 significant ley lines. There are all different sized ley lines. They do their rituals there. They do them for a reason, because they're trying to program the earth for death, torture, misery. That's what Satanists do. They're trying to kill the earth. That's the whole purpose of all of this, is to kill everything.
Oh, I see. So on these ley lines, it then spreads out to the whole grid, the whole Earth, network. Yeah, like I've seen those images of ley lines across the Earth, and so
not just to call in entities and to get power for particular individuals. It's also to program the earth for misery and death.
Right. Okay.
So what I'm teaching people is to find ley lines in their local area. If you go out into nature, most of the ley lines are quite small. They might be 1 to 2 meters across. Plants and trees try to avoid growing within them. If you take photographs of them, you can see the way that the light refracts because of the sound frequency being different. They create circles. It's beautiful circles. So if you're actually standing in the ley, you'll get this circle in nature as the plants try and avoid it. It's actually quite beautiful. So that's part of what I teach in my course, so that people can go out then and put positive energy into the leys.
Okay, so ley lines themselves aren't good or bad. They're just how would you say, energy openings where you can implant whatever your intention is, you can put into that, and then that spreads out to that area. Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Did you also mention in another video that this if you were to see shape sort of like faces or something like that, is that a sign of something?
It is.
Yeah.
So it's interesting in the UK, because the Romans were there before, I guess the Celts. I don't know how to describe the history there because I don't know enough, but there's a wonderful man called Alfred Watkins who wrote a book called The Long Straight Road, or The Old Straight Road. And he describes in that the pagans dedicated most of their ritual spaces to the spirit of the forest. And so the spirit of the forest will show you where the ley lines are. So if you find one of these spaces that has a circle, in nature where the plants are trying to avoid it, it's like a long tunnel of energy and the plants avoid it. You'll often see paradolic visions, is what psychology calls it, because psychology tries to destroy anything that's spiritual. But they'll actually, these entities that exist within the leys want the leys to be discovered. They want that magic to be available to everybody, not just the secret societies who are misusing it.
Mm.
These are fairy entities generally, so they exist within the ley lines. So fairies can be anything really, any kind of energetic entity that's protecting nature. And so they'll show you in humanoid figures, humanoid faces, animal faces, in the plants, in the trees, in the bushes. Those sorts of things will come up.
Can I just, you know, it's interesting. I on my social media, I have a whole thing where I upload pictures of faces that I see everywhere, not just in
Oh,
nature, but
really?
like yeah. So and
Oh, that's fabulous.
hashtag I see faces everywhere. That's and I do
Oh,
that
wow.
with everyone I see, and that's become a
Oh,
joke between all my friends. I always like upload a picture of a face that I see, but I've always linked that to when I'm in a state of high creativity. I tend to see it more. It's not. I've always taken that as a sign to say that I'm really in my charge energy, like I'm really in my creative flow. I tend to notice it more, but maybe there's a little bit more of a spiritual undertone to that as well.
well, maybe you're channeling as well. So channeling doesn't necessarily mean channeling an entity. It can be
Right.
channeling life force, earth force energy,
Mm,
angelic energy. So you could also be, if you're in a really heightened state, that could be something that you're actually channeling. So you're able to see
mm.
those things more clearly.
And would you say, because I've spoken to someone else and they said there's no such thing as angelic beings. They're all in this fourth dimension. They're all like these negative entities. But you mentioned they're like fairy angelic entities. There are a mixture. Is that right? Yeah.
Well, everything has a light and dark or dark aspect, and some things have both.
Yeah.
So this is why the black and white checkerboard is used in Freemasonry to point
Mm,
out black and white, light and dark. Um, there's always a balance, always. You're
mm,
never going to get everything's all skewed to dark. That doesn't make any sense. There's
yeah.
balance in everything. So of course there's positive and negative. You said before, these ley lines aren't necessarily evil. They can be programmed for negative,
Yeah.
and it's said in there's another man who wrote a book. Rory Duff wrote a guidebook on finding ley lines. If you live within a ley line or a portal and sleep within that space, it's probably not good for your energy to do that 24/7. You're not supposed to live in those spaces. So this is another reason why I try and teach people about this, because if you've got nature around your house and you can see a portal or a ley line in it, not a great house to live in.
Mm,
People should know where these things are and avoid them. Um, of course, there are angelic entities. Of course, there are loving light beings, because there are dark. Yeah.
because he would say that in our dimension we are the angel, like we're the good ones, we're the heroes, and then he calls it the fourth dimension, these negative entities trying to attach to us, leech off us. But I mean, yeah, I'm more
Oh,
with
and
you. I
there
think
are those, of course. There are
I'm
those
more with you
entities.
though. I'm more with the there must be a blend of everything. Like nature has a blend of everything. It must be more like that, you know.
If it
But
was all dark, there'd be no light there.
and I want to believe that as well. I want to believe that we've got some support as well in those realms. Yeah.
Well, we
Um,
are the light entities too. We are
but
the
we
light
are as
entities.
well. Yeah,
Because
we are.
we're a light entity generally, for
Mm.
every one negative soul, I believe there's 12 good souls. And we're all here having this human experience now because we're warriors trying to fight this good
Yeah.
fight to bring us out of this nightmare.
And would you say, because I know you mentioned before, are we like that? They've also called this the 144,000, I think it's called. They're the ones that are the kind of the light workers that are trying to raise the vibration, a small minority trying to I think that's also called star seeds in some other fields of work. But is that kind of what you're referring to? There's a certain amount of people, minority of people, trying to get together to, um, you know, affect the people around them to lift them up and raise their vibration.
So I don't know if it would just be limited to 144,000, but that's
Yeah,
obviously, someone's brought that number in.
yeah,
I would say that the number of souls reaching that Christ consciousness, and I'm not religious, but
yeah,
I use that as a term because Jesus Christ and Mary were always depicted with these gold halos for a reason. They had reached that level way before their time. And so, we've got a whole series of people turning to this, reaching this gold soul frequency at the moment, which I believe is, I like the 144,000. There needed to be a certain number of souls. That's why there's so many of us here on the earth at the moment,
mm,
to get to that level all at once, to bring us to a high enough frequency to win this war. So we have seen, or I have seen, because I read auras, I read for a lot of people, this exponential growth in soul frequency over the last 4 years has blown my mind. I've never seen anything like it. I've been seeing auras since I was a child.
mm,
Up until 8, 9 years ago, the vast majority of souls that I would read for would be a violet soul, crown chakra soul, or indigo,
Mm,
opening up their third eye and becoming spiritual and contacting a psychic for that reason. Now it's all white and gold souls, pink and silver souls,
mm,
very, very high frequency souls that contact me. So I would say that's at least 1 to 2% of the population
mm.
that have reached that really high level. That would be more than 144,000 souls.
Yeah. I think it must be more. There must be because there's so many people being like really awake now to what's going on and really doing some good stuff. It feels as though it has to be almost 10 times that at least. At least,
Yeah.
I'd say. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good time. It's good to
Yeah.
see, isn't it? It's encouraging to see there's a lot of people really awake and wanting to almost change complete life paths, do good things. And I mean, even this chat like this podcast called Raising the Bar, instinctively it's about that raising the vibration, raising the consciousness. That came to me that name because of this, that feeling of wanting to come on, let's move up. Let's level up a little bit here. So yeah.
And when you think about the children that are coming through now
Yeah.
are just beyond belief. And I think that's why this was introduced, especially to women who are
Yeah.
pregnant.
Yes.
It's a bit like in King Herod's time, and again, I'm not religious, but I just can't help but go back to biblical prophecies because, he tried to kill off all the baby boys when Jesus was born because you had a gold soul come in and he couldn't have that. So,
Uh,
they're trying to kill off all these amazing soul children who are coming through now because they're the ones who are actually going to take what we create out of this nightmare, this beautiful, positive thing that we're coming into.
mm.
They're going to be the ones that are the custodians of it and make it work. And I think we've got about 1,000 years of this coming.
What the of the good stuff, you mean? The good,
Stuff,
yeah. The new
stuff.
generation that are coming through, yeah. Yeah, I love that. That's great. Rachel, thank you so much. I'd love to do this another time because there's just so much to talk about, isn't there? But and I also want to say thank you for, I know you agreed to it a little bit later as well. So I know it's getting late there as well. So thank you so much, Rachel. Is there a website just so you can mention? I'll put it in the description as well, just but for everyone, if you want to do any work with Rachel, please check out your website. What if you could just mention that?
So it's www.sixthscience.com with a number six. So sixth science, like a pun on sixth sense. It's a bit
Hmm.
hard to spit out actually. I'm also on Rumble, Telegram, BitChute, and YouTube just under my name.